Hi, I'm Rowena. I sold the one thing that reminded me of my father, my favorite cardo, helped my sister build her dream. And when I showed up to her Christmas party, she looked me in the eye and said, "Sorry, this is a private event." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing it hadn't been a mistake, it had been a plan. The speeches I wrote, the business I helped launch, the debt I quietly carried, all erased. Just like that. And now I wonder how many of us are helping build someone else's empire, only to be locked out when the doors finally open. The air outside Callista's home had that kind of sharpness that only Southern California knows how to fake, just cool enough to make you think you might need a coat, but dry and empty, like the conversations I expected to walk into. I stood there for a moment, fingers tightening around the small gift it wrapped with more care than I cared to admit. Simple frame, hand-stained wood, holding a photo of the car I once loved and let go. The lights along the hedges blinked in uneven rhythms, warm white, icy blue, too perfect, too rehearsed, like the life my sister had curated ever since she decided she was meant for more. I took a breath, walked to the front entrance, and smiled at the young man in a blazer holding a tablet. He didn't smile back. "Name, please?" he asked, flat as a boardroom. "Rowena Lark," I said. He typed, paused, typed again, then gave me that expression, part apology, part confusion, all annoyance. "Sorry, you're not on the list." Before I could offer an explanation, I heard the click of heels behind him. Callista. She looked like a department store holiday ad, sleek, controlled, red velvet dress, minimal jewelry, and that same practiced half-smile she'd been using since she got featured in Inkier magazine. "I didn't know you'd actually come," she said, brushing past the man and stepping slightly in front of me, just enough to make it clear who was in charge. I wish you'd told me first. This is kind of a private thing, for partners and media." She didn't say it cruelly, just matter of fact, as if stating it that way excused what it meant. I nodded slowly. Right. A private thing. There was a long beat. She didn't move. Neither did I. The air got even drier. Then someone called her name from inside, and she turned. "I'll try to find you later," she said over her shoulder. I didn't wait. A woman I vaguely recognized from one of her brand launches saw me, smiled politely, and whispered something to the staff. Seconds later, I was being walked through a side entrance, like a package someone forgot they ordered. Inside, everything shimmered. The scent of pine and sugared citrus floated above the buzz of jazz and conversation. People stood in circles, laughing tightly. I kept my gaze down, weaving through them until I found my table near the back, behind a massive floral pillar. The name card said Rana L. Clark, not only misspelled, not even my name. I sat down slowly, smoothing my skirt. No one at the table acknowledged me. They were mid-discussion about brand collabs and seed rounds. I tried to follow, but the blood in my ears made everything throb. I told myself it was just a clerical error, that her assistant must have been overwhelmed, that Callista hadn't meant to leave me out. That was the beginning of the rationalizations. The same kind had made the last 3 years, when she forgot my birthday, when she postponed visiting after my minor surgery, when she told people I was between things professionally. Last Christmas, we'd shared a blanket on the old couch in my apartment, eating store-bought sugar cookies. She'd said, "Next year, I'll have a real place for us to celebrate. Promise." Apparently, I wasn't part of the US anymore. A man sat down beside me, mid-40s, pressed jacket, strong cologne. He looked at me, slightly puzzled. "Are you with catering?" he asked. I turned to him, keeping my voice even. "No," I said. "I'm family." My lips curved just slightly, but my fingers dug into my lap so tightly I thought the fabric might tear. The hum of conversation in the party behind me had dulled to a low, constant murmur, but inside my chest, everything was still pounding. I sat frozen at that misspelled place card, trying to make sense of how I'd ended up here unseen, unnamed. It wasn't the first time he'd been overlooked, just the most public. My eyes drifted to the glossy Art Deco chandelier overhead. Its dangling crystal arms sparkled as servers passed by, with silver trays of pomegranate cocktails. And all I could think about was Ventura last winter standing in the icy morning sun, saying goodbye to the one thing I never thought I'd let go. The car had been a gift from my father, a 1976 Volvo wagon, all steel and soul. Wed restored it together when I was in college, scrubbing engine grease from our hands on Sunday afternoons, arguing over paint colors, laughing too hard when the horn got stuck once on a freeway ramp. That car had held the weight of every failed interview, every crosstown move, every first date. I sold it on a Tuesday morning to a man named Dennis, with a firm handshake and a soft voice. I watched him drive it off the lot like he was taking a part of me with him. "It's not just a car," I remember whispering. "It's where I learned to grieve, to plan, to dream." But I sold it anyway. Because Callista had called. One of her investors had walked away last minute. "It was critical," she said, time-sensitive. She didn't ask directly, but she didn't have to. I knew what she needed, and I had just enough saved from freelance projects to bridge the gap. "Thanks, Ro," she'd said over the phone. "You're a lifesaver. I'll make this count." She didn't mention it again. Not when the campaign launched. Not at the company anniversary. Not even in private. No card. No acknowledgement. Not even an email that said, "I know what you did." I didn't ask. I told myself I didn't need to. That sisters didn't keep score. That this was what family looked like, quiet giving. But a few months later, I found myself in her kitchen with a clipboard in my hand and a pen full of liability ink. She'd been working on her first office lease in downtown Santa Barbara, and when it came to financials, mine looked slightly better. "Your credit's just a little cleaner," she'd said, all smiles. "It's just a formality, really. Legal stuff. I've already got it covered. This just helps the approval." I read every word. I paused at the fine print. Then I signed. Because I wanted to be trusted. Needed to be useful. That was the second time I disappeared. It wasn't until a brunch a few months later that I heard her say it. I'd come late, sat at the end of the table, unnoticed, sipping weak coffee and pretending I wasn't listening. A woman across from her leaned in and asked, "How did you even pull this off?" Callista smiled with practiced ease and said, "I built this with no help. No one believed in me but me." The words cut sharper than I expected. Not angry, just final. That sentence became a silent echo in my head, repeating at red lights and checkout lines. Back at the party, the air felt tighter now. Someone near me was laughing at something. The jazz music had shifted to a sultry swing. I turned slightly in my chair, and that's when I saw it, hanging on the far gallery wall, framed in brushed gold. The license plate, my car's plate, our car, the one from all those Sunday afternoons. Underneath it, a small black placard with white text read, "The journey begins here, Callista Dorn, founder." My body didn't move, but inside something cracked, just a hairline fracture. My hands folded into themselves on my lap. My throat closed a little. No one else noticed. That was the moment I realized not only had I sold my car, I had signed away my voice. I stayed in that chair longer than I meant to. People passed by, laughing politely, their drinks sloshing in crystal glasses, none of them noticing the woman tucked behind the flower wall. The misspelled name card was still in front of me, but I stopped looking at it. Toast after toast filled the room, each one glossier than the last, tributes to visionaries, strategists, mentors. One man clinked his glass and toasted the photographer for capturing the soul of the brand. Another thanked the intern who designed the seasonal scent line. Callista beamed with every name mentioned. Mine didn't come up. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small notebook I'd started keeping the day I sold my car. Inside were scribbled notes, amounts, dates, moments. Not out of bitterness. I just didn't want to forget. Didn't want the memory of what I gave to vanish as easily as my name had. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. Callista stepped onto the low stage near the piano, her champagne glass raised delicately. "I want to share something personal," she began, Voice soft, practiced. A piece I wrote a few months ago during a hard season. Every word is ministrate from the heart. I sat up straighter. My stomach turned. She began reading. The words were mine. Line by line, metaphor by metaphor, I listened as Callista delivered the very essay I had written in a moment of late-night reflection. I had sent it to her in June asking if it resonated. I never heard back. Now she was reading it to an audience that applauded her resilience, her depth, her voice. I didn't clap. I just stared, frozen. The applause roared, and she bowed her head like the words had bled from her soul. It took everything in me not to stand and say, "That was mine," but something in me knew it wouldn't matter. Not in this room, not yet. A man at the next table pulled out his phone. "Isn't this the new site?" he asked the woman beside him. "Looks amazing." I leaned over slightly, just enough to see the screen. There it was, vitalgracewellness.com, the branding ID, built pixel by pixel. I remembered the sleepless weekend I spent hand-coding the footer because the design plugin kept crashing. But now, the footer read, Site Design by Blue Fern Creative. My name? Nowhere. My contribution? Rebranded. They kept my work. But erased my name, I whispered. More to myself than anyone. Story of my life. I excused myself quietly. No one noticed. I stepped past the dessert trays, the string quartet, the photo booth with its faux marble backdrop and ring light. I passed the wall lined with press clippings Forbes Inc. Thrive Global. All with Callista's face, Callista's name. None with mine. A little boy stood nearby, clutching a cupcake. "Is she the assistant?" he asked, pointing at me. His mother smiled gently and said, "No, sweetie. Assistants don't sit at the guest tables." They walked off before I could laugh or cry. I kept walking, slipping out through the side door into the garden. The cold air hit hard. The lights from inside blurred in the condensation forming along my glasses. I leaned against the stone railing overlooking the hills. I hadn't meant to come tonight, but something told me I needed to. That maybe this was the year she would see me. The year she'd say my name, not just as her sister, but as someone who mattered. But all night, I'd been the +1 to my own story. "I'm not the assistant," I whispered into the dark. The words came out shakier than I expected, because for a long time, part of me had believed I was. The cold tile steadied me, my palms pressed against the porcelain edge of the sink, fingers splayed as if bracing for an aftershock. My chest rose and fell like it'd been holding my breath for years. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, lipstick blurred, eyes puffier than I dared admit even to myself. There was something hollow in my expression, like it'd been edited out of my own life and hadn't noticed until now. I dabbed beneath my eyes, smoothed my hair, wiped the faint smudge at the corner of my mouth. Lipstick residue, probably from the glass I barely touched all night. I didn't feel like drinking. I didn't feel like celebrating. "You're just tired," I whispered. My voice barely echoed above the low hum of music through the restroom door. "It's just the holidays, that's all." But even that lie had worn thin. I didn't believe it anymore, not tonight. My phone buzzed on the counter beside me. A notification, YouTube. I already knew. Callista Pierce. Owning my space, a woman's journey alone. TEDx had gone live. Her talk. The one she spent weeks practicing. The one I helped write. My thumb hovered over the screen before pressing play. Her voice filled the tiny restroom, crisp and confident, framed by a red circle on a stage. Her hair perfect. Lighting flawless. But it wasn't just the aesthetics that made my breath catch, it was her words. My words. She opened with the same line I'd once scrawled on a napkin at her kitchen table, late one night, over lukewarm tea and business grant paperwork. "There is no ladder if no one holds it steady." I remembered the grant Clearly Women in Business Foundation. I wasn't even applying. She was. But she needed a narrative that fit the diversity criteria, so she asked if I'd share mine. My background, my struggles. Just to frame the story, she'd said. It's not lying. It's collaborating. I'd said yes. Of course I had. She promised, we're building this together. You'll be on the board one day, but branding needs a single voice right now. That voice was hers. The platform, the check, the spotlight, it all went to her. And I clapped from the third row the night she won. I stood up for the standing ovation. I told myself she meant well, that she'd make space for me. Eventually, but tonight, the illusion cracked wide open. I pressed pause and stared at the frozen frame of her smiling mid-sentence. Her hair blown back just right, her hand raised like she was offering wisdom to the world. And all I saw was a mask made of pieces she'd stolen from me. I tucked the phone into my clutch and straightened my shoulders. The restroom door creaked open behind me as I stepped out. The music hadn't missed a beat. Neither had the people. Laughter rolled across the room like waves over glass. The kind of joy that feels choreographed. I walked toward the dessert table just to blend in, just to do something with my hands. Then I saw her, Callista, wearing the exact same dress, or, rather, the version that wasn't thrifted. Hers shimmered under the light emerald silk, tailored to perfection, neckline just sharp enough to be memorable. Mine was a quiet imitation, same cut, less fabric in the lining, no designer tag sewn into the collar. She caught my eye instantly, raised her glass like we were old friends, and then, with a voice as smooth and deadly as cut glass, she said, "Looks like my little sister found my old taste. I love recycling." The words landed like a slap that everyone else mistook for a joke. The people around her chuckled. Lightly, like background extras in a scene they didn't understand, like they thought I was part of the punchline. I smiled, small, civilized, aware that a bigger reaction would only feed her. I turned and walked away, through the noise, past the clinking glasses and the curated lighting, into the hallway, somewhere quieter, somewhere I could breathe. I pulled out my phone again, opened a blank message, typed slowly, deliberately, "You don't get to do this to me again?" No salutation, no softening, just truth. I stared at it, hovered over send, then deleted it. She wouldn't read it. Not the way it needed to be read, not yet. Not until it would cost her to ignore it. I gripped the phone tighter and stared at the blank wall ahead. I thought of hallway coat hooks, those quiet things screwed into drywall to carry the weight of everyone's coats, bags, scarves. No thanks, no notice, just silent service. And when they snap under pressure, nobody blames the coats, they replace the hook. That's what it'd been, all these years. Not the architect, not the guest of honor, just the hardware. And I was done being part of someone else's structure. I stepped back into the room, not sheepish, not invisible, just there. And that was enough to disrupt something. She was still holding court near the fireplace, surrounded by men in suits and women in curated laughter. Her hand rested on someone's sleeve, her smile perfectly open-mouthed, the one she reserved for networking and cameras. Then she looked up. Our eyes met across the room. This time, I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I didn't shrink. I let the silence say everything. And for the first time in our entire lives, Callista blinked first. She saw it. She saw that I wasn't going to stay quiet forever. The farther I walked from the main ballroom, the quieter everything became. The laughter, the music, the clinking of champagne flutes all faded behind me, swallowed by thick walls and expensive insulation. Out here, the house had a different rhythm. A quiet hum pulsed from a vent tucked into the ceiling, and somewhere nearby, someone adjusted cutlery on fine china. That was all. Even my heels, clicking against the polished tile, seemed hesitant to disturb this part of the house. I reached the end of the corridor, where a warm amber glow spilled from a doorway on the right. The gallery? Callista's so-called private collection. It was anything but private. The room was curated to perfection, every spotlight, every frame, every object precisely positioned for maximum impact. Not for intimacy, but for applause. Callista never let go of anything she thought might earn her admiration, And I knew the moment I crossed the threshold that she hadn't let go of me, either. Not really. My eyes went straight to the wall across from the entrance. There it was, mounted in a sleek shadow box frame, my old license plate. Black and white, slightly dented along the bottom edge, faint flecks of rust along the corners. I hadn't seen it in years, but I would have recognized it anywhere. The car it came from wasn't just a car. It was ours, me father's and mine. We rebuilt it together the summer after I turned 16. Scraped knuckles, Sunday mornings in the driveway. It wasn't just about fixing something up, it was about building something that was ours, from the ground up. Later, I sold it. Quietly. Because Callista's business was struggling and she needed to make payroll. She never asked. I never told her it was from the car fund. I just wired the money, said I believed in her, and I meant it. Now it hung here, on her wall, rebranded. Beneath the plate was a small plaque, polished aluminum. It read, "The journey begins, Callista Dorn's first leap." No mention of me, no acknowledgement. Just another object transformed into part of her mythology. I stood there, unmoving, until my breath fogged the glass. I didn't touch it, didn't have to. My reflection warped across the display, muted, stretched. Like the truth in this whole house. I stepped back, blinking. Then turned to go and nearly walked straight into a couple entering from the other side. They froze. For a moment, none of us said anything. Their eyes slid past me to the license plate. One of them murmured, "Oh, this one's cool," before they moved in closer, already absorbed in Callista's narrative. I slipped past them and out of the gallery. Just beyond the doorway, another cluster of guests stood murmuring in front of a curated wall of framed letters and quotations. I knew what it was before I got closer. Callista's wall of gratitude, her collection of thank yous, letters from mentors, sponsors, clients, and apparently me. I spotted my handwriting instantly, near the center, printed neatly on cream parchment. But something was wrong. The words were familiar, but not exact. Months ago, after a product launch, Eid sent her a private note. Something simple, sincere. It ended with, "Thank you for letting me contribute behind the scenes." The version on this wall now read, "I've learned so much from your strength and leadership." R. No context, no full name, just an initial. A stripped-down, remixed version of my voice reshaped to suit hers. I stood still for a beat too long. That's when I felt her behind me. "Ro," Callista said, voice light. "Everything okay?" I turned slowly. She looked perfectly poised. Lipstick still flawless, heels steady, expression unreadable. But her eyesure eyes were searching mine. "You might want to double-check the attributions in your gallery," I said calmly. "Some of the things you're displaying? They don't belong to you." Her smile wavered. "Barely." A tightening at the corners, a twitch in her jaw. "Ro, this is the place." "Maybe not," I said, my voice soft but unwavering. "But it's the moment." Silence stretched between us. She glanced over her shoulder, but no one was paying attention. We were cocooned in a kind of manufactured privacy. Her party, her guests, her house, but right now, she was standing on ground that wasn't entirely hers. For once, she had no immediate spin. No polished deflection. Just the widening space between us 2 feet apart, but continents away. I walked past her, back toward the main hall. My steps were slower now, deliberate. I didn't rush. I wanted her to hear each footfall echo against the marble. I wanted her to feel them. Just before I turned the corner, I stopped. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. "Next time you borrow something from me," I said clearly, "ask." The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was full. I hadn't even made it halfway across the ballroom when I saw him, Tobias Harker. There was no mistaking him. That careful, too smooth walk, the stiff shoulders that always gave away his guilt before his mouth ever did. And those eyes, same green, same guarded flicker, still couldn't hold mine for more than a second. He was standing near the dessert table, champagne in hand, surrounded by people who clearly didn't know the man they were applauding. Investors, socialites, opportunists. He wore his smile like armor, laughing as if the past didn't exist, as if I didn't exist. My chest didn't ache the way it used to. That old heartbreak had long since hardened into something sharper, colder. This wasn't grief. This was recognition. Of betrayal, of cowardice, of theft, dressed up in designer suits and confident lies. Nobody told me he'd be here. Maybe that was the point. I kept my steps slow, measured. A foolish, flickering part of me still hoped he'd look up, that he'd see me and offer some glimmer of decency. But no, he didn't even blink until Callista stepped into his line of sight and into his arms. They hugged. Not polite. Not professional. No hesitation. That hug had history. My stomach sank, but my eyes stayed fixed. Their easy closeness, the way her hand lingered on his shoulder, how his fingers brushed the small of her back, it wasn't the kind of intimacy you built over business meetings. It was older, warmer, secret. That's when I noticed it. His watch. My feet froze. There it was on his wrist, the vintage Omega. Brown leather band. Faint scratch on the lower bezel. The one I used to polish every Sunday when it still sat on Mom's dresser. I had given it to Callista after the funeral. It was a quiet offering, something personal, something sacred. I thought she'd treasure it. I thought she understood what it meant. Now it was on his wrist. He saw me see it. And instead of looking ashamed, he smiled subtle, smug, and raised his wrist slightly, like he was showcasing a trophy. Callista gave it to me, he said, casual as ever. His voice carried just enough for me to hear. Said it belonged to someone who always knew what time it was. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. But inside, something shifted. Something irreversible. Not pain. Not even betrayal. Finality. A door closing that would never open again. I gave a small nod. Turned away. Not far. Just enough to reach the edge of the stage where the event was moving forward, unaware that the ground beneath it had just cracked. The lights dimmed. Callista's heels clicked across the floor, each step echoing louder than the last. She took the stage with her usual charm, eyes warm, voice dipped in honey. "And now," she announced, her gaze sweeping across the crowd, "I'd like to introduce someone who's been an incredible addition to our journey. A visionary, a strategist, a true risk-taker. Please welcome my new partner, Tobias Harker." Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. I didn't move. Tobias stepped up like he was born for it. Smiling, confident. And then, like a dagger in the ribs, he began to tell my story. He talked about struggle, about vision, about a pitch deck that turned the tide. But every detail he spoke, every battle I had, bled through, he gave it to her. He painted Callista as the mastermind, the builder, the believer. Said she bet on herself when no one else did. My ears rang. I didn't feel rage, I felt clarity. Cold, sharp, dangerous. They weren't just cutting me out, they were replacing me. I stood up. No one saw it coming. The applause was still fading when I walked toward the stage. I didn't rush. I didn't tremble. I just moved forward like someone who had nothing left to prove and everything left to say. I reached the microphone as Tobias stepped back, surprised. I looked out over the room, and I spoke. "My name is Rowena Lark," I said. Murmurs rippled. And before that watch was his, it was my mother's. Before that pitch deck changed the game, I wrote every word. And Tobias, I turned to face him. "You and I both know that back then, you didn't have the guts to use it. You borrowed courage. You still are." The room froze. Not with confusion, but with recognition. Faces turned. Whispers rose. Investors frowned. Truth has a way of cutting through even the most expensive lies. I let the silence sit. Just long enough to sting. Then I stepped down. Callista stood, stiff and strained. The mask had cracked. "You've made your point, Ro." I turned, still holding the mic. The buzz faint in the background. "No," I said, eyes steady. "I haven't even started." Then I walked away. The applause never came, But the attention, the kind that couldn't be stolen, was finally mine. There are moments when the air in a room changes before anyone says a word, like the second before a storm hits a charged quiet, heavy and unnatural. That's what it felt like after my moment on stage. No one addressed me outright. No one dared challenge me directly. But I could sense it. The sudden hush in conversations when I got too close. The subtle pivots, too rehearsed smiles, the way people turned away just a little too quickly. I moved through the crowd like I was walking through fog, detached, watching everyone pretend everything was fine. I made my way toward the drinks table, craving something citrusy, something light enough to pretend I didn't feel the undercurrent pulling me under. But before I reached it, a woman blocked my path. Her hair was curled to polished perfection, and her smile too wide, like she practiced it in the mirror. "Rowena, right?" she chirped. The cheer in her tone was artificial, too bright to be genuine. "Callista told me you were the creative mind behind the site. Said you must be really good with Canva." She laughed, loudly, like she thought she was giving me a compliment, like comparing me to a beginner dragging templates around was somehow flattering. That word Canva sliced sharper than she knew, not because I am above the tool, but because I knew exactly what she meant, that I was just a helper, the girl in the corner moving fonts around, not the visionary, not the founder, just the girl with access to a free design platform. I held her gaze for one beat too long, lips pressed tight in a smile that didn't form. Then, I walked past her without a word. I wouldn't let her get the satisfaction. I ended up in the far gallery, hoping for some breathing room. That's when a hand brushed my arm gently. I turned, expecting another stranger, another sideways jab. Instead, it was Marvin. Older, slouched, weathered in the way people look when they've held secrets too long. He had been Callista's accountant before she phased him out for someone younger, flashier, and more aligned with her brand. He didn't smile, just nodded and reached into his jacket, pulling out a manila envelope creased at the edges, sealed but clearly reused. "I have something you need to see," he said, voice low. Curious and slightly on edge, I stepped into a quiet alcove and broke the seal. Inside was a printed contract. Series A, funding. I flipped through quickly, scanning familiar names, unfamiliar numbers, and then I saw mine. My name, listed clearly as financial guarantor. My signature at the bottom. Only it wasn't mine. It was almost mine. Close enough to pass if someone didn't know my handwriting well. Convincing, careful, but not mine. I stared at it for a long second, feeling the world tilt a little. I never signed this. "I know," Marvin said quietly. "I was told to shred it, months ago. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not after everything." My chest felt hollow. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It wasn't just family tension or jealousy. This was criminal. This was identity theft wrapped in legacy talk and smiles at the buffet. I said nothing for a moment. My hand shook as I folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and looked up. "Thank you," I said simply. "You did the right thing. And now, I will too." The quiet rage in my gut hardened into clarity. No more waiting, no more hoping for people to defend me, no more soft steps. I stepped back into the hall, slipped my phone from my bag, and moved with quiet purpose. I snapped a photo of the watch on Tobias Riston engraved piece my father once promised me. Then the license plate mounted on the gallery wall, a vanity relic from our old headquarters, now bearing only Callista's initials. And finally, a photo of the framed mission statement near the bar, every word plagiarized from my original draft, twisted to erase my name. I uploaded each image to my private drive. Then I backed up every document Marvin had given me, encrypting it and emailing it to a lawyer I trusted from years ago, someone who once told me, "Keep the receipts. One day you'll need them." I wasn't going to war. Not yet. But I was building the arsenal. I stayed another half hour, long enough to make them nervous, long enough to let the whispers circle without giving them anything real. Let them think I was still just the girl with Canva. I drifted near the buffet, silent, watching, listening. A woman I barely knew raised her wine glass in my direction, then looked away just as quickly. People smiled too big, laughed too loudly, but no one came close. And just as I turned to leave, another guest mid-40s, slightly tipsy, approached me with a squint. "Hey," he said, clearly trying to place me. "Weren't you the assistant who helped Callista get started?" There was a pause. A small one. The kind where your whole life feels like it could pivot. I didn't get angry. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, a calm, detached kind of smile that never reached my eyes. "No," I said softly. "I was the sister who gave her everything." Then I stepped forward, heels clicking against the polished floor, and added, "And now, I'm taking some of it back." The ballroom was glowing in a haze of golden light, as if the chandeliers themselves were trying to forgive the sins committed beneath them. Shadows pooled at the corners of the room, while the center radiated warmth and excess, everything Callista had ever wanted people to believe about her life. Dessert carts rolled in like the final float in a showy parade, servers maneuvering around polished heels and satin gowns with trained grace. Callista stood at the center beneath a teardrop chandelier, radiant in borrowed light, glass raised mid-toast. I lingered near the back, barely noticed, just another figure against the textured wallpaper. My fingers twisted a cloth napkin, one I hadn't even realized I'd picked up. It was instinct now, this quiet containment. On the banquet table, a procession of ornate three-tiered cakes gleamed under strings of fairy lights. Each had a placard in curling calligraphy: marketing lead, founding angel, creative strategist, and at the very end set, apart like an afterthought, stood a smaller cake, pale vanilla, laced with pressed violets and rose petals. My cake. I knew every ingredient. I had measured, sifted, and baked it myself 2 nights ago in my apartment in Goleta. I had driven through dawn fog, delivered it myself. No courier, no bakery, just me. But the card in front of it read, "Courtesy of Marcy, Executive Assistant." It was subtle, almost clever. Erasure disguised as delegation. It hit harder than shouting ever could. No one else noticed the breath I lost, or the way my heartbeat stuttered behind my ribs. No one paused their conversation or looked my way. In this room, my silence was expected. My presence, forgettable. I moved toward the stage knot with vengeance. Not with fear, but with the kind of resolve that hardens in silence. Each step was steady, rehearsed by 1,000 imagined confrontations that had never come. Callista's voice dripped sugar. To those who stood by me, believed in the journey, and lifted me when I couldn't lift myself, she said, glass raised. "And before we end the evening," she continued, "let's toast to resilience, both seen and unseen." I arrived at the microphone just as her words trailed off. Our eyes met. Her smile flickered. She hadn't planned for this. "I'd like to share something too," I said, my voice calm, unmistakably clear. I didn't ask. I simply took. A few polite claps echoed, unsure. The crowd shifted, murmured, curious, but no one stopped me. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it with a swipe, and held it to the microphone. I tapped play. A recording crackled to life, raw audio, but unmistakable. "Ro!" my father's voice rang out. "Don't let anyone talk you out of your voice. Not even family." Silence fell like a sheet over the room. I let it stretch. Then I spoke. "I baked that cake," I said evenly, pointing to the one at the end. "The one with the violets. I also wrote the pitch deck that secured your applause last quarter. I designed the website you all complimented tonight. And I unknowingly signed the contract that gave her the funding, under my name, under false pretenses." A wave of murmurs rose like a low tide. People turned, some whispered. A few looked down at their drinks. "I gave her my car," I said, voice unwavering. "My weekends. My name. I offered support in ways most people here will never know. And every time I asked for nothing, I was thanked with even less." Callista stood frozen. Her champagne flute lowered an inch, but she didn't interrupt. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage and looked directly at her. My voice softened, not weaker, but more dangerous in its steadiness. "I was invited into your dream," I said, and then, without warning, I was uninvited from its success. There was an audible gasp from someone near the front. A woman shifted subtly away from Callista. Another man put his glass down, unreadable. I nodded once, acknowledging the moment. "I gave you my silence," I continued. "That contract gave you my credit. Tonight, I'm taking both back." I stepped off the stage slowly. I didn't need to rush. Truth doesn't require drama to land hard. Behind me, I could hear her inhale sharply, the breath before a defensive monologue, a curated spin. But before she could form the first syllable, another voice rose, strong, assured, and devastating. "Actually," Tobias said from the crowd, his voice slicing clean through the golden hush, "I think there's something I should add." Heads turned, eyes darted. And suddenly, the room wasn't just watching me. They were watching him. And Callista knew the reckoning had only just begun. The next morning, my apartment was so quiet it felt padded. Outside, the streets of Goleta were washed in that soft golden light you only get after rain. I sat by the window, wrapped in the cardigan my mother used to wear while folding laundry, and let the mug of coffee warm my hands more than my throat. My phone buzzed again, third time since sunrise. I didn't pick it up. The screen kept lighting with notifications, headlines, voicemails, texts from numbers I hadn't saved. I let them come and go like weather. Peace, I was learning, doesn't crash through the door. It doesn't announce itself with applause or validation. Sometimes it just settles, like dust after a storm. I sipped my coffee and opened my laptop. The clip was everywhere now. Someone had filmed my speech at the party. My voice calm, collected played over footage of stunned guests. And my father's message? That part had gone viral. "Don't let anyone talk you out of your voice. Not even family." I closed the tab. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to read the comments to know who I was. There was a message waiting from Tobias. Short, no excuses. "I'm sorry, I saw it too late." I didn't reply. Not because I hadn't wanted him to say it, but because I didn't need him to anymore. Later that day, I met with a lawyer Marvin recommended. He had sent over additional filesmails, versions of contracts. It was more than enough. By the time I left the office, the legal distance between me and Vidal Grace was officially, irrevocably, clean. No lawsuits, no drama. Just clarity. Back at Callista's villa, I heard they'd taken down the cake display. The wall of praise was under redesign. No public apology, no retraction. But sometimes, justice doesn't need a microphone. It just adjusts the frame. That evening, I pulled out the journal I'd started when I sold the car. I flipped to the first page. I sold my car for her dream. I added a line beneath it, but I kept the map for mine. Later, just before sunset, I drove up the hill to the cemetery. I parked where the grass met the gravel, near the bench I always used to sit on with Dad. I brought the old cassette player with Mize. It still worked, and placed the tape on the gravestone. "Thanks for saying it first," I whispered. I finally caught up. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. As I was walking back to the car, my phone buzzed again. This time, I looked. An email from a nonprofit arts council in Santa Barbara. Subject line, "Let's talk." They'd seen the speech. They wanted me to lead a mentorship program women, post-career pivots, building new stories. I stared at the screen for a long second, then hit reply. "I'd love to, but I won't come quietly this time." I clicked send, and for the first time in what felt like years, I exhaled without flinching. Callista lost control of the story. I just reclaimed mine. That's not revenge, that's survival. Sometimes survival doesn't look like running or hiding. It looks like finally saying your name out loud when no one else would. I spent too long thinking silence made me noble, that patience would be rewarded. But here's what I've learned. If you don't speak up for your place in the story, someone else will rewrite it without you in it. This isn't just about family or business. It's about boundaries, it's about self-respect, and maybe it's about knowing when to stop shrinking to fit someone else's spotlight and start standing in your own. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt erased from your own life? Has someone ever taken your kindness for weakness? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this video hit home, leave a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't speak to you, I still want to know why. Your voice matters here. Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. This channel is about truth, healing, and the kind of quiet strength that grows louder when shared. Until next time, take care of your voice.